super excited for you guys joining us today, and I am really excited about our two panelists today who are going to talk about Agile project management. Just a quick couple of items before we begin. Currently, it is quiet in here. We do have everyone muted except for our panelists, and that's simply just to make sure that our background noise collectively stays at a minimum and everybody can hear what's being offered. As I mentioned, we are going to have a Q&A actually during the webinar, so don't wait until the end of the webinar to have your questions posed. Feel free to raise your hand. There's a hand I can ask questions, I think, in the control panel for GoToWebinar. So go ahead and do that. If you'd like to ask your question by voice, please let me know and I'll go ahead and unmute you, and you can certainly ask it that way. Otherwise, go ahead and chat it in there and we'll be good to go. Last time we did this, we had a really great turnout and a lot of questions, great questions came out, and we actually ran over. Today we're going to do our best to make sure that this ends at 11 o'clock to be respectful of everyone's time. If we do not get to everyone's questions, apologize, but we will certainly follow up with everyone individually following today's webinar. We are recording this, so for your reference, if you'd like to come back a little bit later and walk through a couple of things, it'll be there for you. We'll send out those details following the webinar. In addition, we'll go ahead and provide some contact details. So if you have specific questions, you can get a hold of either panelists today. Yeah, so let's go. So today's presenters, I'll have them introduce themselves in a second here, but we'll have folks from both XBOSoft, who is a terrific partner of GoToGroups, and Alan will be representing XBOSoft and providing some details around his experience and expertise. And Mike Maheu from GoToGroup will be joining us also. If you have any questions for either Alan or Mike, feel free to ask them at any time. Just checking the questions, and there are none yet. Great. So just a quick review through today's agenda. So it's all Agile all the time. We're going to be talking about Agile at a very high level, and then diving right into requirements, test, development, reporting, and where Agile fits in with each of these. We'll have screenshots. We'll certainly provide a demo if there's enough time. But as I said last time, we ran pretty long. So we do have screenshots, and we'll make this available. And if there's a demo needed, we'll certainly provide that again after the webinar today. We'll do a very quick overview of who XBOSoft is and who GoToGroup is. And we certainly have an Agile offer just for you guys. So we're pretty excited about that, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So I am going to cross my fingers and hope that Mike Maheu from GoToGroup is on the line. Mike, you there?
Yes. Hello, everybody.
Awesome. And Alan from XBOSoft should be here as well. Alan, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Awesome.
Hey, Mike. Hey, Will.
Hey, Alan. How you doing?
Hey there.
So good. So 2 for 2. That's a great start. So I think we're going to dive right into Agile. What is it? Before we do that dive, Alan, I thought maybe if you wanted to just talk a little bit about yourself, where you're coming from, your experience with Agile, what you're doing with XBOSoft, and then we can just hand the mic over to Mike, and Mike can go ahead and do the same thing.
Okay, sure. Development for quite a number of years, for about 10, 20 years, going from very low-level operating system type of software to high-level designing and implementing business websites. And then the last 6 years I've been in the consulting world, and we've been doing consulting for quality assurance, quality software, and doing helping people get their testing and their QA processes in better shape. And we've been doing, I did some development projects using Agile and consulted with some companies where they did Agile as their main level of development. And the methodology we use is mainly Scrum. That's what I'm fairly familiar with. We use a very short time frame, iterative type of Scrum. So that's what I'm excited about talking about at this time.
Alan. Mike, do you want to jump in and tell your role?
Sure.
Where your soul?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Mike Maheu. I've been doing software development for too long to probably say on this webinar. But I started out as a developer and kind of worked a lot of waterfall style projects. I had a lot of did a lot of work with IBM and affiliates of IBM for some very large enterprise type projects. And over my career, became kind of an agile evangelist and was challenged to do team migrations or migrate teams away from waterfall processes into more of an agile process to improve precision in development and efficiency and getting things that were unable to be addressed and what were in those terms were not backlogs. They were just big piles of issues in their issue tracking system, turning those into backlogs and watching them disappear as we created these iterative processes. But so now, yeah, I'm at GoToGroup, and I pretty much help companies optimize their development processes and increase their velocity and capacity and do coaching and things like that.
Great. And kind of as a side note, I love working with both Alan and Mike simply because they come from the background of being a developer and being in the middle of it, and then realizing that there's got to be a better way, and now they're on the other side, being evangelists of Agile or extreme programming type of methodologies, and it's always fun to listen to them both. So that aside, so looking at both from a test or XBOSoft side as well as a development GoToGroup side, training, coaching, etc. What is Agile and what should we care? I know we have a couple of bullet points here that we're kind of just loosely talk about, but Alan, in your side of it, and I know you kind of touched on it a little bit, but from Agile, what are the benefits? Why Agile? Why is it such a big deal?
Oh, the biggest benefit is you have very quick, immediate feedback. For instance, in the Scrum project that we were working on, we had a 2-week cycle. We'd have a backlog of requirements that we came up with every quarter, but in the 2-week process, we would have a set of requirements just for that 2 weeks, and then we would complete those requirements, and then the customer can see the direction, see what's going on right away, and the key is that you can make changes to the direction very quickly without losing too much time or too much software or too much effort if it's not what the customer wants. So there's a lot of going back and forth between the customer, yet in a controlled way, so it's not totally out of control, which is the biggest benefit, so that you see things happening very quick, you see things coming online, you see things working, yet it's a step-by-step way, and it's not an out-of-control way of doing things. That's what probably the biggest benefit I see of the Agile process, is that quick turnaround, immediate feedback, collaboration with the customer, and so forth. And that's what I really liked about it, as opposed to a waterfall where you work on something for 6 months to a year, and the customer says, "Oh man, that's I didn't really like that," or they're changing requirements, and the development team is there's no good methodology to handle changes to the requirements, and so everyone gets frustrated. That was before we took up an Agile type of process, which really helped.
Yeah, Mike, do you see the? I mean, it sounds like the communication is always like the biggest factor, kind of, I guess, in any kind of environment, professionally or socially or personally.
Well, so yeah, and to compare the two types of communication, if we look at classic processes, like the RUP, or Rational Unified Process from IBM, which is basically waterfall, the communication was through in meetings. And so if we look at that structure, we see the team, the development team, they're usually separated in cubicles, so they've kind of got a little bit of tunnel vision. They're working on whatever they're developing. There's frequent drive-bys by project managers and various other people that distract the developers, so they tend to get a little bit uneasy because they're like, look, I've got a deadline here for this release and I'm working on this. I can't really do this. So there's a lot of confusion in communication. And then, of course, you have these other folks, the project managers and even senior management that are constantly having status meetings, and they're having the QA lead come in and they're having the development lead come in and they're saying, what's the status? Why are we behind? You know, and there's a lot of what I call throwing things over the fence and finger pointing, and everybody's familiar with this. It's classic. With Agile, you know, it's you know, we're putting our ducks in a row. Essentially, we're saying that, you know, these Agile teams, these individuals that are on this team, they're hopefully co-located, but they're also not there. You know, there's not really, you don't allow drive-bys. People don't just go into the area of an Agile team and distract them from what they're doing, because we've established other ways of not necessarily communication, but well, communication and also what I call radiation. They're able to radiate the information and the status out to the entire company without having people driving by and seeing what's and distracting them or seeing what's going on. And you also have that relationship between the product owners and the Scrum Master. So again, once again, isolating the team from that, the requirements passing and things like that into the backlog initially. So it kind of streamlines the process and streamlines the communication so everybody can focus on what they need to focus on instead of being distracted all the time.
Cool. Yeah, and I guess that's a lot. Communication and kind of rolls into ownership as far as team goes within Agile. So just kind of as we go on to the next slide and maybe focus in on a typical process within a software development life cycle, a release cycle. If we're looking at it from a requirement standpoint, can you guys talk a little bit about just a kind of very obvious typical non-Agile scenario, and then how we would roll that scenario into with an Agile, and then the differences in value there?
Okay, sure, Will. What we did in this latest project, I was working on we did a QPA analysis for a customer, and this customer had a fairly mature product that was over 10 years in working, and they would do come up with a set of requirements every 3 months, every quarter. So what happened is that they would take those requirements and break them in, and this is what we call the backlog. And they break those requirements into 2-week segments. So they would have about 6 set of requirements, and then they would go through those requirements in that sprint, and during the sprint, the requirements were frozen just for that 2-week period. Then at the end of 2 weeks, we did another analysis of the requirements, and any bugs from the previous or any requirements analysis we do another set of 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks, we would take the backlog from the quarterly analysis and bring it into the 2-week sprint. And so it was fairly dynamic in that the requirements were changing on a 2-week period fairly frequently, yet it was pretty much not a total free-for-all, because you had that quarterly cycle where we decided what we wanted for a larger cycle. So, but the requirements, one thing that I'm looking forward to listening to Mike more of, is that our software tools to control this were not that adequate. So I'm really looking forward to Mike talking about GreenHopper with JIRA and so forth, how to get our tools better so that we control the requirements better. But for the most part, it worked very well doing it that way.
Yeah, Mike, Alan talked about JIRA and GreenHopper and some other tools on the requirement side. How does that work when going, from a non-Agile workflow to Agile?
Right. Well, first of all, when we go from Agile or non-Agile or waterfall to an Agile, the basic our most important aspect to that is obviously breaking down requirements, and that's probably the most complicated thing for a company that's new to Agile to tackle first. And this is one of the things that requires the most coaching is how do we create the backlog from more classic type of requirements. For example, if we have use cases that are 90 pages or 30 pages, and there's business analysts that have slaved over these things for months. How do we break that down into stories, user stories, and even epics? And that takes due diligence. Obviously, we need to go through these requirements, and we need to extrapolate them out and put them into smaller pieces. And then, of course, that's how we build our backlog. From there, it's just a matter of planning, which is similar to classic planning maybe, but we're planning sprints, so they're smaller iterations. We're not planning a 3 to 6 month release. But we are planning several iterations usually, and putting the various pieces in there. And of course, now that we've broken the requirements down, we have to make sure that we structure them correctly and have the iterations go in the correct sequence and whatnot. But
so we have you talked about like storyboards or kind of visually looking at it. We have a couple of screenshots. I'm just going to move into the next one here, just so we can take a look at it. But
sure.
Kind of as you were talking about the planning board or the backlog and so forth, with regards to requirements, is this something that, is this JIRA and GreenHopper, is this something that is like the typical layout of how things look?
Well, this is actually the new rapid board from GreenHopper. So this is an example of, and this, is not necessarily Agile specific, but in this example, what we're saying is we could have a couple of teams, and they could be 2 separate sprint teams, and they could either be working on the same iteration or they could be working on a different iteration. But in this view, we're saying that Team Y currently has these 2 stories in play. One of them is still left to do. They have not started on it yet, and then there's one that's in progress, so they're working on it. And if you see in the bottom right, we're showing some story points. So they're using a Scrum process. They're basing their capacity off of how many story points Team Y can complete in a sprint. And then, of course, down below we've got another team. So this is a great view to see for people that are not necessarily on the team to say, okay, well, where are they? Well, they've got Team X has three items in progress, and Team Y has 1, and it looks like Team X has 1 that's been completed.
So this is a good visual representation of building the requirements and kind of.
This is a good, yeah. This is a good. Well, actually, this is a good representation of work in progress. There's a plan. If you look at the upper right there, there's a plan tab or link that would show the planning area. So what that would show is it would show a big list of your backlog, things that have not been put into a sprint or an iteration. And then what the team would do during their Scrum session is obviously go through that. They would move things up and down and rank them. They would apply story points and do those kinds of things. And then they would start their sprint. There's a bar, and it would basically allow them to select what's going into the sprint and then start it. And then from there, then they would come into this work screen. And there's various ways to look at planning. This is the rapid board view. In GreenHopper, there's also the planning board, which is the original planning board, which is going to show the versions or the sprints on the right and the backlog items and the items that are in the sprints on the left. And then there's also a task board. But I think it's almost like a natural progression as far as this product is concerned to me. This is my opinion, but there's a natural progression with GreenHopper moving towards these rapid boards because they allow you to do some things that you couldn't do in the past, which is swim lanes, which is what you're seeing here. I've created a couple of swim lanes based on teams, but the swim lanes could be based off of any factor. But it also allows you to create sprints across projects. You can kind of base your sprints off of filters and things like that in JIRA, which is extremely powerful.
So it sounds like it's pretty configurable to like a team, and that allows them to be a little more flexible when they're kind of putting the entire process together.
Yeah, that's the one thing I like about all Atlassian products, and that it's really, because everybody has their own flavor of how they do Agile, whether they're doing Kanban or Scrum or even at their own hybrid. and you know, the plugins like GreenHopper and JIRA and even Confluence, I mean, it kind of allows you to build your own process within the tools and display what information you want to display and use whatever you want to be the information radiator, whether it be dashboards in JIRA and Confluence or both. So.
Yeah, so that sounds like it's a pretty important piece too, is that, you know, if you're doing Agile in a Scrum method, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to follow strict guidelines around Scrum. I was in an Agile meetup last night in New York, and they talked about Scrumban, which I'm assuming is a mesh between Scrum and Kanban, and it's just the way that the team evolved. You know, kind of bringing in other teams together who were using Kanban, and then another team using Scrum. So
right. Well, that's popular too, because, you know, Kanban is like the obvious choice for production support teams, right? Because they're more task driven.
Mm-hmm.
They're not real concerned about scoping requirements and things. They're really trying to keep a backlog in play that are things that are happening in their production environments. So there's a lot of companies that grasp that concept quickly. You know, how many tasks can we consume in a Kanban situation? And then of course with Scrum, there's more enterprise rules that are important. That being said, I have not come to too many companies that do 100% Scrum by the book. So there are definitely a lot of hybrids out there. And we even, you know, in this webinar are talking about testing and how to integrate and how does testing work within the process. Of course, there's some companies like Atlassian who don't hardly do any formal QA type process because they're so automated. But then there are more classically driven companies that have an entire QA staff. So how do we inject the quality assurance process into Scrum?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so a couple of questions come in, and I should highlight. You know, raise your hand, or if you want to ask like an audio question, we'll just unmute you, and that way you can ask it. Otherwise, it's up to me to potentially interpret it, and that might be trouble. Or just chat it in the questions, and we'll go ahead and get to those. A couple of questions came in. Okay, thanks. So I'm going to ask, they're kind of based around workflows and output, I suppose. So they have a JIRA workflow. It's pretty typical, open, in progress, resolved, verified, closed. How can we distinguish development complete task, such as resolved state, and QA complete task, verified complete? How can we distinguish development? So I'm assuming that what they're looking for is within this planning board. How can they distinguish the two? Is that done like visually, either by the icon or the description, or how do you know what is what?
Right. So that's an interesting question, because that just opens up a lot of, and again, you know, it's completely configurable, but we certainly could rename those teams. And for example, Team Y and Team X could be on the same sprint team. So let's just pretend that we have a co-located team of 5 people. There's 3 developers and 2 testers, QA folks.
And just, sorry to interrupt, but just a quick follow-up. The question was followed up with, this was mainly within the planning work or within the planning board itself? So we're looking at the work board, it looks like, but the planning board with regards to the differences between the two.
Sure. Well, so that, and I'll kind of go into that as well. But so there's a couple of things. Obviously, QA folks are going to work on bugs as well as developers. So bugs are bugs. There's some products, and if you look at the top, there's Synapse RT. There's also Bonfire, which kind of brings into JIRA the concept of test sessions. But typically, test sessions are associated with the bug itself, or the requirement, or the story, and those things are kind of in a little tab at the bottom. But in the planning board, if you want to visualize how a test team is being integrated into the process by using something like Synapse, or creating issue types in JIRA called test cases or tests or whatever. That's an option, and a lot of companies like that, because in this view that you see after you've planned your sprint and you've delegated what test cases are involved in what stories and what bugs from a backlog are going to be involved in that sprint, you can come to the workboard and see those things here. And also, as I was going to say earlier, is you could actually break down the sprint team into swim lanes. So you could show one single sprint team as the QA swim lane and another one as the dev swim lane if you wanted to.
And then Alan, on your side, and I'll start flipping through the slides here because we just want to be careful of time, but on your side, is that kind of how you see it laid out? Maybe not necessarily the same visual concept, but at least the same concept?
Basically, yeah, we have a little bit different way. Of course, everyone that does Agile does things a little differently according to their requirements. And sometimes when we do it differently, it's not always the best way. But you know, we had 5 teams. Each team was around between 3 to 6 developers, and we really didn't have any dedicated QA people, which was kind of strange at first, which was a major problem. This is when we were doing XBO was doing some quality assurance assessment consulting to a very large company, and we were trying to convince them to have dedicated testers, even though the Scrum was working very, very well. But you know, you always need to be improving your processes and so forth. So that's what we were trying to encourage them to do, and to set up a dedicated team and so forth. But yeah, that's kind of how we work it. But the requirements, and I see how he did his storyboard here, and I like how tracking, when you're doing your testing, tracking it back to the requirements is something that is very easy not to do properly, and this really helps in that area.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, the JIRA and GreenHopper and the ecosystem, even some of the other products that integrate with JIRA are wonderfully flexible for all different kinds of environments. So let's kind of take a look at the test and look through the same process.
I was going to say you could show the traceability matrix, and that would also show how you can compare and contrast. There you go. So this is based off the Synapse RT plugin, but this is going to allow you to kind of see where tests are. These are test cases in JIRA. You can see that there's one that's failed. That's showing the specific customized workflow for testing. A couple have passed, and there's one that has not yet been tested. So, and then of course on the right there's a little message board. So this is a great way, using just another plugin in JIRA, to collaborate. It allows collaboration for testers. It allows the testers to work the test cases through a workflow in a single view. And then also I think there's a traceability matrix view also that would show the comparison of the test cases and where they are being tested and how they are being applied to the various stories in a single view.
Yeah, and this has got kind of the same visual representation of the GreenHopper plugin. So just to go back real quick, kind of along the same lines, is there much difference in going from a non-agile environment within test, especially as it integrates with requirements? Is that, Alan, have you seen that being a big hurdle at all?
I'm sorry, can you say that again? I'm having a hard time hearing.
Oh, sorry. From a test perspective, especially as it relates to integrating with requirements that we looked at previously, going from a non-agile to an agile environment, is kind of what are the challenges that you're seeing in that regard?
Oh, well, the biggest challenge going from a non-agile to an agile is that when you have requirements in a non-agile, boy, it's hard to change, and when changes happen, it's very frustrating for everybody, and also changes come very late in the cycle, whereas with an agile, especially with a Scrum, you have a built-in mechanism to handle the changes that you know are going to happen, that always happen. So if you don't plan for something that's always going to happen, it's a very poor process. But in Agile, because we do the sprint every 2 weeks, you have a mechanism so that if the direction is not what the customer wants, you can change the direction, you can change the requirements, you can change things and also have a mechanism that it is well controlled, so you can trace things back from your testing to requirements. Like I like what he said there about you can trace your test cases to the user stories and see how well you're covering the user stories and so forth. So that's probably the biggest difference I see, and the biggest advantage of Agile when you're going from non-Agile to an Agile environment. The flexibility you have in the changing of requirements is by far the best part of it.
And is the integration with requirements, is that hard? I mean, both from a tool set as well as a mindset?
Integration of requirements is rather hard in either aspect. What we did is we did it mainly manually, and when you do things manually, you miss things and you don't follow it through, and when things get busy, it's easy to skip things. So that's why I'm very interested in listening to how Mike explains how GreenHopper works, because you really need a mechanism, a tool that helps you keep track of those things. So you're in the heat of trying to get things done, you have something that helps you keep your requirements and your testing in sync, so that you're still heading toward the goal that everybody agrees that you need to be heading for.
Okay. Yeah. It seems like it's always tough, like almost more tough mentally than it is, with an actual physical part of it. But I can see how it's challenging at both. So one question came in with regards to moving a ticket from one swim lane that is in a completed state or a done state to a non-complete state in another swim lane. It's almost like duplicating it but changing. I'm guessing, Renee, let me know if that's wrong, but duplicating it and then changing the state. Is that something that's possible, or does that make sense to do?
Well, so you can't have two states at once with one single thing, but you certainly could, in that example, if you go back to the workboard there, the way that those are being triggered, those swim lanes are based off of filters, and in this example, in this JIRA system, we have a custom field called team. So in order for us, let's say for example, you had a longer, or there was a couple of extra steps in your workflow, you could get to a certain point and then toggle the issues team custom field, and it would then switch it to the other swim lane in mid workflow, and that's how you would do that. That's the power of rapid boards, is they're all based on filters, not just the board itself but the swim lanes. So again, it's it's completely customizable. The other thing is that the reason why they named them rapid is because it just kind of streamlines the whole process. You start out in the plan, you kind of work your plan, you drag things up and down to rank. You basically click a button, you name the sprint, it starts off. You go into the work phase, and then if you look at the upper right, there's a little arrow up, and so once everything is in a done state, you basically click that, and you're finalizing your release. And then you can do a retrospective at the end of the week and look at the burn down charts and things like that. So it really is more of a rapid, helping you make a more rapid process, because Agile, well, one of the misconceptions about Agile is that everybody's going to be faster. They're going to be able to do twice as much, twice as fast. That's not really true. It's really more that everybody is more focused and things are more incremental. And going back to the whole gathering requirements thing, when we gather requirements in the old way, where, like I said, we have these huge documents and everything's kind of, throw that to a developer and they're reading this use case over the weekend, for crying out loud. It's like a book. So when things are broken down, obviously the developer can focus on the bits and pieces much quicker than looking at this huge thing. They don't get this feeling of being overwhelmed by large requirements. They can kind of focus on little pieces at a time. The iterations happen faster. There's more precision to the process.
Sounds like one of your weekends might have gotten eaten up by one of those documents.
I have flashbacks.
So just quickly, if you're in the planning board or work board, you mentioned drag and drop. Do I have to go into a filter to update these, or the actual ticket, or can I just take this guy here and just drop it into in progress because now that it started.
That would be drag and drop. If you wanted to change, and one of the things you don't see on this view, if you were actually to go click on one of the items, it would open up a right-handed on the same screen. It would show you the details of the item in the right. And for example, when I said you could switch the swim lane by toggling the team, you would just click the item on the right-hand side, you would toggle to the other team, and then it would automatically switch it to the other swim lane. But yeah, you can certainly drag and drop across the workflow.
Awesome. And I think we had, let's see, we have another, this looks like it's the traceability matrix. This again is Synapse, a third-party plugin, but it's giving you just a kind of an overview matrix of the test cases with regards to requirements.
Right, so this is where we do Agile, and we kind of have a little bit of the classic testing integration. A big thing with a lot of larger companies is they get audited. They need to show traceability with that certain test cases have been run and they've passed on certain requirements. So on the left-hand side, we are looking at stories, and on the top, we're looking at test cases. And then, of course, you can see the red one has failed, and then below there in the matrix, there's been a couple of bugs created, and it's still red because they have not been resolved. And then, of course, the green is showing that they had a bug at some point, but it looks like they fixed it. So yeah, this is the testing user story traceability matrix.
And a question came in. Alan, you had mentioned, you kind of touched briefly on Scrum, type of Agile. If you have a team that's doing really well, do you need to add to that team to make it do really well? Or from, if you're adding team members to like a QA team, are you expecting additional improvements, or what's the philosophy behind like adding more members to a team?
Well, of course, adding members means usually you have a very particular specific need that is not being met. And that's usually the justification for adding team members, and particularly in the testing area, sometimes it's hard to identify that particular need, but you can do that very easily by with some metrics where you show that too many types of errors are getting into production or getting into later stages, and that can be solved by more thorough and better testing earlier on. And that's how we justify getting more people into the QA team, by showing how if we can eliminate these types of defects earlier on, then later on in the cycle we can concentrate more. When you're doing exploratory testing late in the process, you're concentrating on finding the really deep, severe problems that an expert can look for, rather than looking for the real simple things that can sometimes bog you down. So what you want to do is find the simple problems as early on in the process. If you have good metrics, you can show how by adding team members you can solve and get those metrics done, so that you can make sure that you have as few as possible defects get into production. And usually the way you can determine that, I think 95% is the standard percentage that is used for a quality product. You want to make sure that if you're not catching 95% of your defects earlier on, then you need to make some changes and to improve the process. So that's how I try to show the particular need for more QA people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think just real quick, so this is where what I call team dynamics, and it's important when companies are trying to move into an Agile realm. The way that you structure the teams, typically a company that's going into Agile, they obviously have a classic process. They usually have a QA group, and sometimes quite large. Just by saying that you're going to create this new process and you're going to co-locate people, that meaning being QA and developers, that kind of puts people off a little bit at first. So it's important to, when you're selecting your team members, that you're selecting based on, when I say team dynamics, I mean folks that you would think would get along. Also blending the right expertise, because in order to see increases in capacity and velocity and watch the team grow and basically develop synergy within the team, it's going to be important that at the beginning you select the right members for the team.
As always, quantity and quality that should be taken into account.
Yep.
So let's take a look at development as we move forward here. So we've got about 20 minutes left, a little less. I think we just have a handful of slides and screenshots left. But now as we roll into the development side, can we talk a little bit about, and we have a couple of screenshots here too, but especially with the integration with both requirements and test, what does the development side look like in agile, non-agile type of environments?
Well, first of all, and if you read any Agile book, it'll say that they call it something else. I call it cross-contamination. But the idea is that collaboration occurs, and when teams are co-located or either virtually or physically, collaboration kind of does a few things. It obviously makes things more efficient, and folks are communicating more. They're not doing throwing the thing over the fence. But what also happens is there's a blend of experience, and there's knowledge being gained from different types of people on the team. For example, QA people become familiar with unit tests, and how are unit tests written, and how are they run, and what do the results look like. And developers become more familiar with the QA process, assuming you have some classic testing methodologies being blended into the sprints. And so by doing this, both sides, developers and QA, are learning from each other and developing skills that they didn't have before, which in the end, in my mind, makes them better at what they were doing in the beginning, which would be development in this case. And so, again, the teams synergizes. They do continuous integration. They bring in other technologies and things to help, branching strategies with their source code. Now QA folks are becoming familiar with what branch are we on, and are we going to merge, apple and orange, and it just becomes this. It's kind of fun to watch, actually.
So it sounds like I'm just going to move on to a screenshot here, but it sounds like when you're integrating the development teams with test teams, et cetera, you're actually just widening or increasing knowledge transparency across the entire team to make the entire process better.
Yeah, and this is a great shot, because this is showing things from all of those from the team itself. So you're looking at a code commit that was made, in this case to Bitbucket, that is being pulled into JIRA. And you're also looking, if you look to the tabs to the right, you can see that there's test case coverage. So we're seeing what the QA folks are doing on the team. And we can see also via Synapse the related story there, the green square at the top. And then on the right, we can see what Agile sprint they're on. This looks like the ASP release. And so just from this one story, we get the large picture of what is happening within the team on this particular story, without even opening it up. So it's very powerful. Again, information radiation. Anybody could look at this.
Yeah. So we have a couple of arrows highlighting some pieces here. This is JIRA. This is a typical ticket with the kind of some Agile piece here, just to show that there is some integration with GreenHopper and certainly the Agile process. And then it looks like there are some, what was I looking at? Oh, some of the parent item, as well as you had mentioned the commits. Alan, does this look familiar? Is this something that helps, on the test side? If you look at a ticket such as this, does it help give the test team a little bit more visibility into, kind of what the heck is happening all the way around?
Yes, I think this would help quite a bit in giving more visibility. As I look at this, JIRA with GreenHopper, I can see how this would greatly help in the management of what can be a chaotic process, but it needs to be brought under control more, and I see how the JIRA can really help do that.
Yeah, it looks like this would be really helpful whether you're, as Mike had mentioned earlier, a co-located team in the same physical space or distributed. I think we might have another screen here. No, okay, so just a couple more slides here, about 15 minutes left. A question came in, how does fisheye, from Atlassian, how does fisheye fit into this, either from a information radiation perspective or an agile perspective? How would fisheye actually fit into this process?
That's great question. So in this example on that screenshot, where it's integrating directly into Bitbucket, which is Atlassian's fairly new cloud-based repository management system. I mean, you can use Git or Mercurial in the case. Bitbucket, if you look at the tabs to the right, source and releases, those would be tabs dedicated to fisheye if fisheye was integrated with JIRA. So when the developers on the team make their commits, they can, in their comments, designate which issue ID they're referring to. It could be one or many. And then, as you see here, you would see similar information under source that would show the commit, the change, and you could then, any user could then, assuming they had the permissions, could click on the differential and it would take them to the fisheye dashboard and show them the actual code change. So again, information radiation now all the way down to the actual source code changes. This becomes very important also even in non-agile situations, but with traceability. Like I said, I've worked with many large companies that get audited, and they have to show that when they do a release of software, what changes were made and what related requirement were the changes made. In other words, we do not want to see developers making commits of code that are not related to a requirement, because that could introduce a bug later that would not be related to a requirement, and it creates a problem. And then again, to that as well with the reviews. Doing test-driven development and doing code reviews during the development process is just more precision in the process. It's going to allow for less bugs to be introduced when we release our software, and we can always go back and look at the reviews. And also, this allows for people other than developers to participate in reviews, to view the results of the reviews. And again, more information radiation all the way down to the actual development itself.
So again, as far as transparency, knowledge, team, communication, the fisheye piece can integrate within the JIRA ecosystem and certainly pull in those.
As well as Bamboo with continuous integration. I know that Atlassian has some large, screens displayed in their collaboration rooms that show continuous integration builds happening, however often they happen, whether they've passed or failed. The test case, the unit tests that are being run, and the results of those unit tests. Again, radiating information out to everybody in the room about even build process, build status, and build processes.
Cool. So about 10 minutes left. So now that we've got a lot of the stuff together, it's working, teams are communicating, they're testing, they're building requirements, they're developing, etc. How do you visually report this? I mean, I don't know if there's really Agile reporting or what actually comes out of it is just reporting on Agile. But how do you, how does the reporting piece fit in this with both, kind of like you're saying, information radiators, like real-time reporting, I suppose, as well as for senior level folks, our bosses who say, what the heck is going on? How do we provide that reporting packaged up for them?
Yes, and that's another can of worms. Reporting is key, and companies that are used to classic processes, which is the majority, that are either in Agile or are moving towards Agile, love reports, and managers love graphs and charts. The difference in Agile in comparison is we're not really looking at Gantt charts, and we're not looking at timelines, and we're not necessarily looking at people individual allocation. which is kind of a hard thing for some companies to grasp. So there are these interims and these things that you can do by using other, and I'll mention another plugin, Tempo, that can show, like some teams want to use not just story points, but they still want to use time. And so JIRA provides the work log ability. Tempo puts extra features showing where you can report basically not just individual allocation, whether they're under or over allocated, but also entire team allocation reports. So just recently, one of these types of companies that wants to do time and story points, so when we're working with GreenHopper, we're doing capacity planning based on story points and also based on time and initial estimates. This allows this company to be able to report and kind of radiate the information naturally from the task boards and the rapid boards and the what I call drive-through type reporting, where it's ongoing, it's this in-your-face constant information radiation. And then there's the other types of reports. This is an example of a testing or type report, but where they can view over-allocated folks as individuals or teams via the time management aspect. This is an example of a great it's still kind of drive-through or on-the-fly reporting, but this is showing a test run that was using the Synapse RT plugin, and they're running these 4 test cases. It says, the state, one or two have passed, one has failed, one's in progress, and it also shows the related bugs and stories or requirements there. And this would be for one or many test runs. Again, an easy, quick click, and this could easily be radiated to a monitor, or just anybody can view this stuff.
Just wanted to flip over to another report that we put together. This is with JIRA.
I'd just like to add one thing.
Yeah, please, Alan.
Yeah, the report that we found most valuable is what we call the burn down report. Because of, when you do Agile, you're forced to break things into very small pieces, which allows you a lot of visibility in how progress is going. So we have all these things in a burn down chart, and as you get things done, you see the chart and things get accomplished, and so it's a hopefully as they're fulfilled and so forth, and it's a nice, simple, easy chart to understand, to follow, so that when upper management says how it's going, you have a nice little visual chart to show them, because you're right, they love charts. The Gantt charts and all the other things are kind of hard to follow. It's a nice little simple chart that really encapsulates how the project is going.
Yeah, that's a good point, because it does show you kind of over time with an end date too, and kind of where you are within that range.
Visible in many different places. In the Agile tab at the top, they're also visible in the Projects tab. And also, as we saw earlier, on the Rapid board, as you execute your release, it will give you the reports board that allows you to do burn downs and retrospectives on the release or the version or the sprint.
And Alan, you had mentioned earlier about measurement being a pretty key part of Agile, or as far as the deployment of it, making sure that, hey, this is working. I imagine that the burn down chart is something specific that you can look at over time, to see how that's actually providing value or working.
Yes, very much so.
Oh, cool. Okay. So I think that's kind of it. We've got about 5 minutes left here, and just wanted to provide some information on XBOSoft as well as GoToGroup. Please, if you have any questions, we have a couple that are specific, and we'll just respond to specifically or one-on-one. But feel free to ask some more questions. A quick slide about XBOSoft. Alan, did you want to run through this very quickly?
Sure, yeah, XBOSoft. Yeah. Pardon?
I was going to say anything in addition to what's on the screen.
Not too much. I think we pretty much covered what XBO. Do you want me to go into what XBO does right now, or I'm not sure I understand?
Yeah, we have a couple of minutes, so if you want to go ahead, go for it.
Sure. Yeah, the project that I was referring to, we did a quality process assessment with a very large company who had a project that was very mature but still ongoing. And like I said, they had 5 small teams, and so we went in there and tried to help them improve their processes, because you know that if you're not improving, you're going in the other direction. So you have to have a mindset of constantly trying to improve your people, your processes, your quality of your product. You have to have that mentality. So we provide consulting in that area. And then we also help in the testing also, functional testing, mobile phones, automation, performance testing. So we try to cover the entire world of testing to offer to our customers. And we feel like we've provided quite a bit of value in there trying to improve their product. Because you know, that's how customers choose your product. They take a look at the quality of it and make a decision on that. That's what our goal is improve the quality of our customers' products, and therefore, of course, their profitability also.
Yeah, and just awesome guys to work with, a great team to work with. Check them out on the web, www.xbosoft.com.
And by the way,
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, in that one consulting thing, I think one thing that people don't understand is that usually when we go in there, they know what they need to do to change. What we did, especially for the mid-level management, we gave them all the ammunition they needed to go to the upper management and show them what needed to be changed and why, and then they also had the reasons to go to the engineers and say we need to make changes, because you know the engineers will always say, "Oh, we're doing everything correctly." That's actually what all the engineers said at when we went into this one company. We don't need to make changes. So we helped the mid-level management make do all their justification for the change they knew that needed to be made.
Oh, good.
That's what we felt our biggest value was to bring to our customer.
Cool. So just in the sake of time, Go-To Group, another great group of guys, biased for sure. Some products we have that integrate with test and development, specifically around JIRA, Atlassian products, and HP, both of which we're partners with, as well as Sugar and Salesforce and so forth. We're on the GSA schedule, so if you're a government client, we'd be happy to help you there. Tons of services, including an Agile services training package, which Mike puts together uniquely for everyone's specific environment, so that's always fun. And certainly around best practices too. We do a lot of custom proprietary stuff for some of the bigger firms, financial firms out there. Yep, and we'll be at the Atlassian Summit, which is next week in San Francisco. Come drop by our booth at booth 10. So about a minute left. I mentioned an offer. What we hear a lot of times is, oh, this is all great, but how do I take advantage of it, or what do I do next? Where do I go to actually, kind of put the shovel in the sand? We put together, XBO and Go-To Group put together this little 6 hours to Agile Nirvana package. It basically gives you a one-on-one session with XBO and Go-To Group to explain the current environment and kind of what you want to do and how you want to get there. And then we kind of fill in the gaps, making sure that the roadmap is there, and you can take that up to your team and say, here's an idea that we should take a look at. It's 6 hours to Agile Nirvana. Go-To Group has a 6 hours to JIRA 5 package, so if you're familiar with that, it's very similar to that type of process. GoToGroup.com/6 hours to Agile, you can find that there. Otherwise, give us a ring, and we'll be happy to point you in the right direction. Alan, and let's see, I have one more slide left, but Alan from XBOSoft, you can contact him, services@xbosoft.com. Mike at Go-To Group, sales at GoToGroup.com. And really quickly, just some upcoming webinars and events. You can visit the Go-To Group site or the XBOSoft site to see what's coming up. We will certainly provide another webinar in June. We're working with the great guys at XBO to put something together, so feel free to visit our sites to find out when that is, or we'll send out a note beforehand too. So before we wrap things up, Alan, as always have fun talking to you. Thanks again for joining us today. We really appreciate your feedback and your thoughts.
Thank you, Will.
Awesome, and Mike, the same. Always have fun talking to you, so thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks everybody for showing up.
Yep, thanks everyone for joining us. We'll be recording this. We were recording this, so we'll be providing this shortly. We'll have a follow-up email so you can find out where to find these slides specifically, as well as the recording. as well as any next steps that you might have or any questions you might have. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great Thursday. Bye, everyone.